Amala Foreman, welcome once again to my studio.
Thank you.
So,
It's awesome to be here virtually.
yes, I was going to say, so here we are honoring the social distancing and still connecting. Well, today is a day I'm going to really unleash the idea of dueling. What are we calling it? Dueling interviews. Yeah, how are we going to remember that? DI. Maybe there'll be a better name, but for right now, a placeholder is going to be dueling interviews. So I'll start. What's the first question you'd like to ask me?
I would like to ask you what would be most timely and most supportive for us to unpack and discuss on this day. It's Easter Sunday.
Mm.
Many people are gathering virtually as opposed to in their usual family dynamics, and there's a loveliness of remembering, the gatherings of the past, and then there's of course a call to the future. And what would be most helpful for the most people out there on this day?
Well, I would say I'm not sure if the topic is going to matter as much as the fact that it is inspiring. With that, no matter what we talk about, that it's hopeful. I can turn around and talk about strategies and things we can do, and that would be fine. We can do that. But I want to let people know that if I were going to do that, it would be basically to make sure that whatever my response would be, that it definitely is honest and offers hope, for people. So it doesn't really matter like what the topic would be, just as long as it's encouraging and inspiring. I think that's what's necessary right now. So I wanted to keep the answer general because I don't feel like it would be really appropriate to get too specific, asking me to just choose something to talk about that's inspiring and ignoring the fact that, well, the reality is it has to be inspiring, and that's what we need right now.
Mhm.
So, okay, so let me do my question to you. And I don't know if we need to do notes. So let me see. So let's see. Do you have a sense of anything, since you're asking, that would be more inspiring than others given this time frame right now? Any content to talk about?
What's coming through on this day is like the theme of Easter, and the theme of rising and of
Mm.
changing, and of doing things differently, and how we can use that as, as motivation, as inspiration for the times ahead.
That's beautiful. So before you ask your question of me, because that was a great answer, by the way, I wanted to tell you something. We're going to pause this little dueling interviews for me to respond to that because there was not a question in that yet. I don't think. I think that was a great answer. But but I really wanted to talk about this. Tell me a little bit about unleavened bread and the role that that plays in the Jewish tradition.
Here's my best remembering of Jewish history, where in the time of um, of the pharaohs and the Jews being enslaved in Egypt, there was um, there was a time where the Jews had to leave very quickly, and they did not have time to allow their bread to rise.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a commemoration of that time. And I don't remember the specifics about the leavening, but that's a piece of it.
But this is why I'm talking about it. Don't you think it's really ironic? There's some content here in the unleavened bread is where it doesn't rise, and in the Christian tradition, he rises and the bread rises, and it's like there's yeast or whatever you want to do it. And I thought, wow, isn't that interesting that the unleavened bread isn't in Christianity, but it is in Judaism where they don't acknowledge that he has risen, right? That he's the Messiah, I guess. And then and I just thought that was a very fascinating, because you use the word rise both times. I just talked about unleavened bread, and I don't know if you picked up on that. That I'm really processing the he has risen. Oh, but it's unleavened bread. He hasn't risen. And I thought, like, isn't that interesting how we have the bread of life, one rises and the other doesn't. And I just thought it was interesting. I don't think we're unpacking it fully or most accurately, but just close enough to really say, well, it's just want to talk about that there's an interesting closeness here between he has risen. Oh, but we use unleavened bread, or it doesn't rise. I'm like, oh, isn't that interesting? You
It's
know?
interesting to like consider it, because I did catch that when I was talking about it.
Mhm.
And there's like this resonance of like, in the Passover story, of like escaping, and having to the freneticism of having to leave, where you were. So it would be interesting to tell like a greater story of that,
Right.
and mature that up.
That's happening now too with the coronavirus. It's not just Easter Sunday. We're in the throes of the coronavirus here, and there's a lot of similarities there. I don't know if you were catching that as you were speaking.
Yes, I was.
It's fascinating, right? These archetypes again, these storylines, they hold up and they repeat themselves, and it's because I believe the message is pretty much the same for the most part. If we were to tell a greater story, I'm sure it would be applicable in all situations. So we can go back to the dueling interviews, and now that we threw all this out, you get to ask the next question.
Yeah. So my question to you, since I'm inspired by our um, Passover story, and the fact that it is the time of Passover, what greater story would you tell about the Jews leaving Egypt at that time?
You answered the question at the end of the question, and it's that it was time.
Mm.
Again, just like what's going on here, we need to stir things up. It's how life moves forward. We get very comfortable in our well-worn ways, and we think that that's optimal, but you're looking at people being stirred up right now, and really what you're seeing is their relationship to being stirred up. It's like, no, but I want things the same. And I remember this line. It says, well, God will comfort the disturbed, but he'll also disturb the comfortable. So it's the idea of being pushed out into evolution, if you want to call it, or your own emergence or growth. And it's like things have to change. I think that's why passing over is one of those really important things. When people pass away, sometimes we even word, he passed over into the other life. And we think of Passover as like, okay, put the blood over the door and it'll protect us, and that this pandemic will pass over us. And it's like, no, it's time for change. It's time for Passover. Some shall live and some shall pass. And I think the greater story is, for me anyway, in this case, is to acknowledge the wisdom in passing and not knowing when it's whose time and it's TBR, and just to play with these are the rules of life, always has been. And you're having a negative relationship to the rules, though they were laid out before you even put in this world. Why are you struggling with the rules? You've been playing by them all along. And it's like, of course it's going to be time for chaos and time for catastrophe. That's why we always say, if you are doing really well, right, serve others when you can, yourself when you must. Because if you're blessed, you can uplift people who could really use the upliftment. That's the whole idea of the brigade, right? The immune building brigade is to uplift other people. So does that answer your, well, that would be a question. We give up my question if I asked, does that answer your question? But I want to ask that. I guess I do want to answer that question. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
Okay, you get to ask another one now.
Okay. Following up on what you said about how this is life, this time, this pandemic time,
Mm-hmm.
is just what has always been happening, that we just haven't seen behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
And though there seems to be a quality of all at onceness about it,
Agreed.
the
Agreed.
whole worldness about it. Everyone essentially being in the same boat. And what quality does that contribute to this time?
Again, you did it twice. Time. You answered the question. It was time. So what's going on in the world is that there is a pandemic. I mean, literally. And if you look up pandemic, they look at it like it could be of a country or the world. And of course, the WHO, the World Health Organization, looks at it as the world. And even though pandemics have always been, it's not happening all the time. We know that there have been pandemics throughout history at different times. Now, there's always been diseases and viruses and bacteria and fungi and, things that take us out. It's just not necessarily at this level of what the pandemic is right now. And this is not going to be our last pandemic, but it's the one we have now. It's like pandemic season, if you want to call it that. And we have to have our going with itness and going, okay, I need a plan for this. Well, good. You don't know if it might be the last pandemic in your lifetime, or there could be another one following it. Either way, we're really not skilled. How's that for a word? Does that work? We're not really, whatever it is, competent, professed. Is that a word? Professed in our ability to
Practice,
practiced. That's a good one. Yeah, practiced in handling this well. So since it's new, we're handling it poorly. As any practice that you begin and you do it initially, it's more animalistic, primal, reactive, and it's not until we get our wits about us, maybe we see this for a while, or we start to stop and we allow ourselves to grow through competence, through breathing and recognizing that this too shall pass. And who knows, maybe I'll pass with it. It's possible. Or your loved ones will pass with it. That's possible too. But it will pass. And so the fear is like, oh my God, what if it's somebody I love? But it is somebody I love, or it's a friend of somebody I love that passed. And it's like, we're acting as if that's unacceptable, like that could never happen. Those were gonna happen. I mean, if it's a friend of a friend of a friend that passed, that's pretty fortunate on your part if you really value life and your longevity, and you want to hang around longer. You want your loved ones to hang around longer, because it could be your loved ones. So you give thanks, and you appreciate, and you realize that you deal deeply with the fragility of life, and how fragile you are, and how fragile your loved ones are, and everything that we took for granted is now been like the rug has been pulled out from under us, and we're having to learn to really appreciate the time that we have. And it's always been that way, but now we're dealing with it. And again, because it's new, as far as most of us dealing with pandemics, we're dealing with it poorly, because we're becoming more reptilian brain, animalistic brain, primal brain, whatever you want to call it, brain stem, something very old, right, is running us. And it's not until we develop a little proficiency, a little experience with this, that we start meeting it in a higher brain. But we got to go through kindergarten to get to first grade, to get to second grade, to get to third grade. And you're observing a whole lot of people exposing that they're in kindergarten right now, or having kindergarten moments is probably even more accurate. Even everything I'm sharing, as advanced as it might seem, it is advanced. And so we can call that this is an advanced moment, but I get my kindergarten moments too, So, and fortunately I observe them rather than just participate in them without really observing them. So I think that's really the key here. So was that a question, and does this constitute an answer? And if you answer, this is my question, and it's back to you.
Yes, I believe that you answered that very well. Thank you.
Cool.
One of the things that I noticed is when you said that, like two points stood out. That you said, you need to start to stop. I don't even know if you caught that early on what you were saying, and it's like, wow, because you talk about active stopping and how important.
Absolutely. And it's up right now, active stopping. Keep going. Go ahead.
Mhm. And also appreciation,
Mm-hmm.
and just gosh, I'm noticing that. Wow, just that really
Say
that
that again.
really
Say that again. You went
that
all you went.
I went
Yeah,
wonky.
after appreciation, and you touched your throat, it went. So I missed what
Oh,
you said.
well, that was pretty powerful. Just
Right.
because it really it did hit my throat in terms of just
Mm,
like the depth of appreciation and the moments that
mm,
have felt so sacred, and wondering, is this the last time that I could possibly have this experience, and
mm.
how it really makes it ever so sweet.
So, is this a dose of awesome or are we moving on? Okay, this is our dose. That was a pretty good dose. I think that
Yeah.
sound bite was a pretty good sound bite. That will probably be the highlight of this talk, I would believe, was that question. So I appreciate you presenting it, and I hope my question is helpful, not just you and anybody who may be watching this.
Absolutely.
Any final statements before we send off?
Ah, just blessings. Ride this well.
Mm,
Go with it. Go
hmm
with itness.
mm.
Practice that.
Wow. Well, thank you, Amala. Happy Easter, happy Passover.
Thank you.
Happy me being with happy you. Thank you. I'm grateful for everything. So thank you.
Thank you. Love to your family and
Thank
Francis.
Same. Stu and the kids' kids.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.